AP Bio. Let's try this again. Someone had a question about epinephrine and how it was able to create all of these different responses. So let's try to also connect this to signal transduction pathways. So I picked a different picture from chapter 5 so that we could also touch back on phosphorylation. All right, so epinephrine created in the adrenal glands. Epinephrine is also known as adrenaline, so those two things are the same. So this is a hormone that can have a bunch of different effects, and one of them that we talked about actually all the way back in health was the fight and flight response. And there were several things that response created so that the animal, the organism, would be able to survive something that was dangerous. And so it does a few different things. Let's see. Let's write this down. So number one, it will raise glucose levels. In the blood. Number two, it will raise glucose in the muscles. And number three, it will reduce glucose in the intestines. Now, all this makes sense because raising glucose level overall in the blood will give you more energy, will send glucose to your brain, so you'll be able to think better. Raising glucose for the muscles would be able to make you run faster, act faster, fight. And then reducing glucose in the intestines makes sense because that's just a waste of energy that would be spent on digestion. Now, these three columns here are actually these three things. So raising glucose level happens here in the liver cells. So this is process number one. Raising glucose levels in the muscles. This is process number two. See how we have some vasodilation here? And then this is number three, reducing glucose levels. So all of these processes are actually the three functions of epinephrine. But it's pretty efficient because it's only using epinephrine, but a couple different receptors and different transduction pathways. So if we were to look at the signal transduction pathway that raises glucose in the blood, we would see that epinephrine will settle into this beta receptor, it's green, in the liver cell. And here you have glycogen deposits. Glycogen can be converted into glucose. And so there's a particular signal transduction pathway that's going to make that happen. You have the same epinephrine, you have the same beta receptor, but the difference is that it's located on a different cell. These receptors are located on blood vessels in the muscle cells, and when it lands there, it has a different effect. So the signal transduction pathway that happens inside here is different than the one that happens in the liver cell, and the result is, the response is vasodilation. So in this case, you've got an increase in glucose. And in this case, you have vasodilation. Dilation. Hard to talk and spell. That's an L. Spell at the same time. Now, our third column is going to reduce blood to the intestines, so reduce digestion. But if you look, you'll see that although these are blood vessels still, same as in the muscles, the receptors are different. Here you have an alpha receptor, so these little blue cups. Epinephrine will land in the little blue cups, and a different signal transduction pathway will happen here and result in vasoconstriction. Oh my, whoa, what's happening? Okay, so you can see from here to here, you've got a much narrower blood vessel, and from this blood vessel to this blood vessel, you can see that the blood vessel is actually much wider. So these are three different, three different signal transduction pathways with three different results that will actually all coordinated together help contribute to that fight or flight response. Now let's just connect back to chapter 5 again when we talked about this particular, this detail of a signal transduction pathway. This phosphorylation cascade is happening in all of the signal transduction pathways. Simplifying, this is just that transduction portion of the pathway. And really all this means, there's a lot of complicated balls and arrows and ATP and phosphates going on here. But what you need to remember is simply that, and I'm going to just write this down for you, that kinase, let me move this out of the way. I'm sorry, this writing is so bad. Transfers a phosphate from ATP to a substrate. Now this substrate is just one of those intermediary molecules. Whoa. Oh wait, I have an eraser, hold on. Actually, we'll call this a series of intermediary molecules in transduction. So it's that that part of the pathway where they're all changing shapes, and that's this part here. So you can see we've got, let's see, here's kinase right here. Kinase plus ATP will activate this protein. This protein gets activated by a different kind of protein here, a little ATP, and you can see that it gains a phosphate and it gains a phosphate. So really all you need to know is that phosphorylation cascade is simply transferring these phosphates, let's change color a little bit, transferring these phosphates to a substrate, and that's what will eventually result in your cellular response. And what is the cellular response in this case that we've been talking about? These three things here. All of this that's going on. So cellular response, cellular response, cellular response. So this phosphorylation cascade is really the detail of that transduction portion of a signal transduction pathway. So hopefully this answers that question of how does epinephrine know when to do what? Well, it doesn't really know. It just depends on where it lands and what cell it's in, because all these cells have different signal transduction pathways and different phosphorylation cascades, which will result in a different cellular response. So hopefully that helps. And again, if you have more questions, if this is actually more confusing than helpful, then come see me on Monday.